Hi, I'm Chris Sulo, and I work at Sonera LLC, and I'm manager penetration tester there, and also the lead developer of Nikto, which is a web security tool that I'm going to talk about tonight. As Jake said, co-founder of RichSEC, and also the Open Security Foundation, which runs osvdb.org, and which is in Jake's hands now. Founded that with him. A few other projects, some smaller ones. Dav test for doing web dav security and trying to exploit systems that have that enabled. CMS Explorer, which will kind of look at WordPress or Joomla installations and look for plugins and vulnerabilities, and feed that to more suited tools for doing testing against something like Burp or some other type proxy. And then the cert.net default password database, which is got a few thousand default passwords in it for different products. So if you're actually doing testing, run against come against some kind of application that you don't have credentials for, you can see if maybe they didn't change the defaults on it. So pretty much tonight I'm just going to talk about Nikto a little bit, some of its history, and how to use some of the basics of it. So maybe little demos if I have time. It is an open source web security tool, which was released 10 years ago. Actually, December 27th was 10 years from the initial release. It was initially designed to test for one particular file against or a set of SSL-enabled web servers, and from there it just kind of grew to what it is now, which is testing for about 6,500 different files, like vulnerabilities and different kinds of content, and misconfigurations, default files, that sort of things that you don't want on your production networks, your external web servers, that type of thing. It also does a lot of checking for outdated servers from the banners and different types of HTTP headers that might come back from a web server that you might not, wouldn't necessarily see if you're in a web browser. And does quite a bit of software identification, so looking for different login screens that might not be obvious. Tries to identify like different CMSs, different software products, that type of thing. It's written in Perl, and it's pretty self-contained. It will run cross-platform. You really don't need any modules with it unless you want to test SSL, which is pretty common. And most installations of Perl on Windows or anything else will actually come with an SSL module in it, so it should work right out of the box. In the 10 years, it's been pretty popular. The SecTools.org survey that Fyodor does, it's been either the #1 or #2 for the last 7 or 8 years. Burp has surpassed it this year, which is well deserved, but a little bit disappointing. So apparently, got to do a little more work. And it's been integrated in a lot of different things. So Nessus will actually run it if you have it configured to see it in its path. And thanks to Ryan Lane, it can actually log to Metasploit, so get all the data right inside Metasploit. And then it comes with XML and CSV output, so you can integrate it into anything that you might have kicking around. So as I said, it's Perl, and you might need some SSL modules. If you're doing the Metasploit, you actually need XML or RPC, but there's not too much. Not a lot of people actually do that, so you probably don't need that right out of the box. You should just be able to grab it and run it. It is unfortunately command line only. There's no pretty UI to make it easy to point and click, and there's tons of options and tons of configuration items in the file that sometimes conflict, make it really confusing. Sorry, a little alert going on. So it can be pretty complicated to run, but essentially that's it. So to run like a basic test against a web server, that's really all you need, which is to run the Nikto PL file and give it a host of whatever your target is, and that's going to actually go ahead and run a test. And I don't know if you can really see that, but that's actually the output of the tool when it runs. I'll talk about some what some of these lines mean and how to read them. But basically, it's your target information up at the top, and then your findings in the sort of middle section there, and it's always going to sort of tell you the OSVDB ID if it has one, and what it found, and then some sort of maybe helpful information depending on what kind of mood I was in when I had the test. So, like the source directory on cert.net has directory indexing on there, which is intentional, but it points this out to you, and then things like the tools or user, doesn't really know what they are, but you might want to go check it out for yourself. So, the basic things that you need to actually run a test are just a host and a port. So most web servers run on port 80, and SSL is running on port 443. So there's more than one way to do these things. Like, all three of these examples are exactly the same. So all three are going to run against example.com on port 443 with SSL. And the first one and the last one actually specify SSL in the command line, and the middle one will actually figure it out. So it's going to try SSL first, and if that works, it goes ahead and does a test. If it fails, it will try HTTP without the encryption and go ahead and run the test. You can also give it a list of hosts from a file, and then specify the ports on the command line or the ports in the file. There's some different syntaxes there. They're all pretty well documented. I actually don't recommend doing this for really long lists of hosts because, I'm not a great programmer, so there's all these little memory leaks and stuff that add up over 50, 60 hosts, and all of a sudden everything's crawling really slowly. So, but if you have just a few, it works pretty nicely. And then lastly, you can actually specify like a root directory to run in. So if you want to just test things within the blog directory, you can specify it in a couple of different ways. And instead of testing at the root level, the web server will actually look for all the norm files in that directory. So it'll look for like blog admin, blog login.php and stuff like that. So when the results come out, you see there's basically two different types of output information, and one is going to be a line that starts with a dash, and this is basically sort of extraneous information that is nice to know, but it's not necessarily actionable things that you're going to need to worry about. In this case, this is actually just a status message of how far along the test is going, and a guesstimate as to how many minutes it has left. And it is a guesstimate based on elapsed time and number of tests and that sort of thing. So you can sort of take it with a grain of salt. Lines with a plus are actual findings and things that you might want to check out in more detail. In this case, the section in red is always going to be like an OSVDB ID, and you can actually go to osvdb.org and get more information about this particular issue. The portion in blue there, separated by colon, is the actual file that was loaded on the web server. So you can just go and actually paste that in your browser to see what happened. And then green is going to be your output message to try to kind of briefly explain to you what it is. It's not, it was never really designed to be like a full explanation of every vulnerability that's in there. It's kind of just enough information to point you in the right direction and find a little bit more information on the internet somewhere. Reports, so if you want to save the information that you find, come in all these varieties, including the Nessus MDE format. Like at work, we have a lot of parsers for Nessus output, so it was just easy to write that and use our existing parsers without having to write a new one. So you specify output files with -O, and if you specify a file extension for one of these, HTML or XML, it'll pick that up and just automatically use that format. Or you can force it by using the -F, the capital F, the format option, and tell it what type of output you want to do. So if you want to pipe it to something or have a different file extension for some reason, you can go ahead and do that. Here's an example of HTML reports, and you'll see it's pretty similar to the on-screen output when it's running. You've got your, your URI. It's got a little bit more information, so that it was a GET request, the actual request that was there, and links to the host, both with IP and host name, depending on your situation. One of those may or may not work. So again, it's pretty standard from one type of report to the other. They should all have basically the same information. There are some interactive features when stuff is running. Not a lot of people actually know this, but when you have it running in a terminal, you can hit any of these commands and change the output or get a status and figure out what's going on. The next host is pretty handy if you're actually running and find one of those web servers that's just awful slow running, and you get you hit space and you find out it's going to take 9 hours to finish or something. You can just hit capital N and sort of skip it and move on to the next one without actually canceling your test. So if you specify more than one port, you don't have to start over with that host or port missing. So there's some other one really important feature is the update feature, and just running Nikto.pl with dash update will go ahead and get the latest database files and plugins and other things and get you up to date. And in the future, that'll probably be the only release method that the product comes with. So once you download an installation, it's just you never need to reinstall or download a new one. You just update it. Right now, there are a few things it can't do, and that's on the roadmap to get fixed. There are a whole bunch of plugins. They're just Perl. If you're a Perl programmer, you can add them pretty easily. It's pretty well documented. But some of these things, there's obviously tools that do a much better job of them, like doing subdomain guessing and that sort of thing. But Fierce 2 does a fantastic job of it. It's way faster. But depending on your needs, you may specify a file that's got 5 or 6 names in it, and then just run it in here rather than firing up Fierce and sort of going through all that and making sure that's all working. You can just do a few things in here. Some of just a few of the things that it does. Again, the user enumeration is another thing where there are other tools that do it much faster. But if you have a short list, it's just easier to let it happen in this scan rather than doing it somewhere else. If you want to write custom tests, there's a bunch of DB files that are in the plugins directory, and they're all CSV. They're just text, so it's nothing to be seriously intimidated, about looking at. If you want to write custom tests, put them in a file that's like UDB instead of just DB. And the reason for that is if you ever do an update, they will not be overwritten, but they just get included at runtime, just like anything else. So we have tests in there that are very specific to some of our clients, and so it's not something that I want to include for distribution to everybody. But that way, when the testers on our team pull it, they get those tests automatically, and so we can check for some of our clients' login pages being available when they shouldn't be. They're a very specific path for them. And then each test needs a custom ID, and all this stuff is documented. But here's just an example test. This is actually the last test that was added that I saw last week, which is a database connection file. And basically, those are all the fields that are in this file, and kind of their sort of field identifier names. But basically, you give it a file name that's going to do a GET request against, and then look for either provider equals or driver equals in there, and it also has to be a 200 response. So if either of those first two and it's a 200 response, which is a standard OK response, it's going to trigger this as an alert to say, hey, this file's here. And you can do some tricky things with saying, if it sees this, it's not a positive, which is how we can deal with false positives in certain cases. So it seems a little intimidating, but when if you look at the documentation, each field is explained and what you should put in and how it should work. So it's not it's really hopefully not too bad. Next release is just about ready. It's been almost a year since the release happened, which is sort of unfortunate. But there's been a lot of code committed to the subversion tree, and a lot of tests out of there that haven't been pushed out. which is another reason for getting rid of the current release model because I'm lazy. So I'd like to just commit it to SVN and then have it available to everybody to use. So that's one change that we're going to make. Some other improvements to the banner matching to avoid false positives and a few false negatives. And then some things we were batting around at work were timing control for running scans. So, you know, to run a test for a certain number of hours, and then if this host isn't done in 3 hours, move on to the next one. Run this command for no more than 6 hours, and then just die if you're still running. And then one thing that I'm currently working on is just a window. So you can say run between midnight and 3 a.m. and then pause, and then next time midnight comes around, start up again. And I think that'll be really helpful for me because you know, we do a lot of middle of the night testing, and then, you know, 6 a.m. rolls around and I've got all the stuff I need to stop for our window, and I often forget things. So, you know, hopefully that will help, you know, avoid that situation. One of the other new features is that if it sees a park domain, like on GoDaddy or, you know, Google Ads or something like that, it'll alert you. It doesn't stop, but it tells you that you're actually just scanning Google and probably not what you're intending to. And some more variable population from various parts of the website. So if it sees, like, in robots.txt, you know, if it says like don't go in the WordPress directory, well, okay, there's WordPress, so now I'm going to use that variable in all my tests now, instead of trying to figure out where WordPress is. I know right where it is now. So it's just a little smarter than the way it actually works now. One thing I've been talking a lot with David Lodge, who's the other developer on this, is what we're going to do from here for the future. You know, 10 years ago, Nikto was, you know, took over from Whisker, from Rainforest Bucky's Whisker, where, you know, he kind of stopped developing it, and Nikto kind of took over. And you know, 10 years later, you've got Metasploit, and you've got all these other really awesome tools. So where does Nikto fit into that? And I think what we've decided to do is sort of chip at the edges of pen testing and not try to step on some of these awesome web security tools that tons of people are spending a lot of time on. And so make it easier for updates, like I talked about. Integrate some of these other tools so that if you see a CMS, just go ahead and run all these CMS Explorer stuff. I was talking with John Riley about integrating his UA tester. He's all for it because he doesn't even want to run his own program. He just wants something else to run for him. So trying to get some of these sort of one-off things that, you know, maybe people don't even know about. And if you see WebDAV, go ahead and, instead of having to run DAV test or even know about DAV test, just go ahead and run all these tests that DAV test would do. They do all this stuff automatically, so enumerate users, that sort of thing. And make it even more point and shoot than it is now. So that, you know, for a pen tester, the value is it's just reliable. I just run it and I get some results, and hopefully they're good. And it did a lot of things that, you know, I didn't need to look, you know, to worry about. I can focus on Metasploit or whatever. And just a few other things that we're trying to do. So, you know, and cut out a lot of false positives. It's always a challenge, but we're, you know, kind of focusing on making that even better, which is one of the chief complaints that you hear if you write software like this. So that's about it. I thought I would have a little more time for a demo, but I guess I talked longer than. Feel free to hit me up with questions. We're next door, and you know, email me if you have you know, additional questions or whatever. There's a mailing list that's fairly quiet, but usually questions are answered as long as you're polite. So. Sometimes it takes a day or two, but that's what happens when all the developers have kids. So I guess that's it. Thanks. I appreciate it.